All right, folks, this is Jason with Living Houseless. This is a brand new channel that I have created to specifically talk about living out of your van conversion or your overland build. For those that don't know me, I have another channel called Primal Outdoors where I travel around with my two old dogs and my Ford E350 van and create videos about my experience outdoors. If you guys haven't seen that channel, I'll put a card to it. But for those that are familiar with me, we're going to use this channel to specifically talk about living out of your setup, whether again be a van conversion or an overland build. Now, I got a specific question from one of my patrons on Patreon about using a DC to DC versus a solenoid or VSR when it comes to adding a dual battery system to your vehicle. Which one is going to be the better option for you as far as what you should do? So first thing I want to talk about is how a battery should be properly charged by a proper charger. So there's three stages of charge. There's bulk, there's absorption, and then there's float charge. So in a good charger, it will do all three of those stages. Now the bulk charge, it basically sends the maximum amperage of that charger at the battery until the battery gets to roughly 80%. At that point, it will go into absorption where it'll hold it at a constant voltage and the amperage will start to drop off until the battery gets to 100%, and then it will hold it at a constant voltage and just give enough amps to it to keep the battery topped off at 100%. Now, you should look at your battery's specification from your manufacturer. In my case, I have a Full River AGM 210 amp hour battery. Another spec you should consider looking at when you're looking at the specs is the maximum amperage the battery can take. So in my case, it is somewhere like 60 or 70 amps that it can take before it's actually bad for the battery. So the DC to DC that I have, which is the Renogy 40 amp, I'm well below that number, and I know that my DC to DC is safe to send the full 40 amps at the battery during the bulk charge. Now, let's get into now what a DC to DC actually does. And so a DC to DC is actually a legitimate battery charger, and it takes the amperage that it gets from the alternator and supplies the amperage and voltage in those three different stages to your battery, so that makes sure that your battery gets the optimal charge for that battery, which will help that battery last its best life. So things that you should consider looking at when you are looking at a DC to DC is, what I talked about already is what's the maximum amperage that your battery can take. So you don't want to make sure that you buy a DC to DC that's going to overamp your battery. Second thing is you're going to want to consider the wiring. So whatever DC to DC you get and however many amps you're planning on supplying to that battery, make sure that you're wiring properly to be able to handle that amount of amps. And there's charts online and everything like that that you can look to figure that out, to make sure that based on your distance and amperage that it'll tell you what gauge wire you should be using. Another thing you should consider is your alternator. Now, with my old 1994 van, the alternator was a 130 amp alternator, but what I found out through research is that the alternator didn't actually supply the full 130 amps when the vehicle was running at idle. I actually found that it only supplied 60 amps at idle. And once I did some testing with an amp clamp, I found that the van itself while running used about 45 to 50 amps just to sit and run. So that really only left me about 10 amps, 10 to maybe 15 amps of excess to run the DC to DC. Well, the DC to DC is requiring 40 to sometimes 50 amps to operate. So that left me at a deficit. And what will happen if you don't upgrade your alternator is it will pull that deficit from your start battery, and you can actually, sitting at idle, you can accidentally discharge your start battery, or even driving, if you're not giving it enough amps, your start battery could be discharging on you, and that'll leave you in a bad situation. So what I ended up doing is I upgraded to a high amp alternator from Nation Starter and Alternator. I bought the alternator. This is not a plug for them. I'm just saying where I got it. Anyways, I bought that alternator. It produces 200 amps at idle. So now I have plenty of amperage to supply the vehicle, and I have plenty of amperage to supply the DC to DC. And for those that don't understand how an alternator works, an alternator will only produce as much amps as being asked of it. Okay, so it's not like I'm just pushing 200 amps at the system. It's only going to use the amps that the vehicle asks for and that the DC to DC asks for. I'm just making sure that the alternator is capable of supplying the request. Okay. Now, and also another thing to understand about alternator is it's a single stage charger. It only has it has a single stage regulator in it, and it only provides one stage of charging. And that stage is specifically designed to top off a start battery, because a start battery is not meant to be deeply discharged. So it's only getting a little bit taken off the top to start your vehicle, and then the alternator is designed to basically supply power to your vehicle and to top that battery off. It's not an actual 3-stage charger, and so it can't do a good job at replenishing a deeply discharged battery like a deep cycle battery. And the last thing I think you might want to consider is, if you're going to add solar to your system, you may want to look at one of the DC to DC models that have a built-in MPPT controller, so that way you'll have one unit that basically controls your alternator charging and your solar charging. And by doing that, a lot of the units have Bluetooth capabilities to where you can get lots of information about how where your charge is coming from, how much charge you're getting, what stage of charge you're in. And when that is all combined into one unit, it makes it very easy for you to see what's going on with your system. Now Renogy has a system that allows you to do that, and RedArc is another good one, another very popular one, the RedArc Manager 30. It also provides shore power, so if you're wanting to be able to plug into AC and charge your system that way, that's also a capability of RedArc Manager 30. It's a very expensive unit, but it does do all three things in one unit, and then also has the ability, a battery management system that gives you a ton of information about your system. So it's very expensive, but it's compact, and it will allow you to do a lot. So that might be an option you might want to look at. So let's talk about solenoids or VSRs. So they basically do the same thing. They have nothing to do with the charge. They're basically just a switch. They either disconnect the two batteries or they connect the two batteries. So the point being is when you start your vehicle, they connect the two batteries so that it can charge off the alternator by itself. Or when you disconnect or shut your vehicle off, they disconnect the two batteries, so that way while you're using your house battery to run your fridge or whatever device that you're trying to run, it's not also inadvertently discharging your start battery. Now, the difference between a solenoid and a smart relay or VSR, voltage sensitive relay, is a solenoid is just a dumb switch. Basically, you turn your vehicle on, connects the battery, turn the vehicle off, disconnects the battery. A VSR is voltage sensitive, so basically you start the vehicle, your voltage will start going up as the start battery charges, and once it gets to a specific voltage where it believes the start battery is fully charged, then it will connect the house battery and start charging the house battery. So it's a little bit smarter, but in the end it still has nothing to do with the charge. It's just connecting the battery or disconnecting the battery. So what's the problem with this system, and the reason why I don't really like it, is it connects two different types of batteries together in parallel. The DC to DC actually keeps the two batteries separate. It is pulling power from the alternator, but it doesn't actually connect the two batteries in parallel. These actually connect the two batteries in parallel, which is a great option if you're wanting to double your amount of amp hours on a house battery. So if you take two batteries of the same type, say you have two 12-volt batteries that are both 100 amp hour, that would still give you 12 volts, but it'd give you 200 amp hours, and that's a great option for doubling the amount of amp hours for your system. But if you're going to do that, you really want to make sure that you're using exact the same batteries, and even batteries that were bought at the exact same time. You don't want to use different manufacturers or different types of batteries, because the charge profiles are completely different. And the reason why you don't want to use different age batteries is because batteries lose their capacity with age. So if you have an old battery and a new battery connected together, the system's only going to be able to charge it as much as the old battery, and you're going to lose capacity out of your new battery. So you want to buy your batteries at the same time, and you want to use exactly the same manufacturer and same model type. So in the case of using a solenoid or smart relay, you're connecting a deep cycle battery, which is a completely different technology, to a start battery, which is completely different from the deep cycle. So, and then you're connecting it to an alternator, which is really only designed to top off a start battery, not fully charge a battery from a deep discharge. So you're just not going to get the full capacity out of your deep cycle battery, and you're going to shorten the life out of that battery over time. So that's why I don't really like that system. A lot of people do it because it's cheap, because the solenoid smart relays are fairly inexpensive versus buying a DC to DC. Going with a DC to DC is definitely more costly, but it's a more efficient system, and you're going to get more life out of your very expensive deep cycle battery. Anyways, if you guys would like to dive deeper into this rabbit hole, a great channel that I've just recently discovered is Jesse Gorder over at Solar Solutions. He is making some fantastic, fairly concise videos that I feel are really clear on the subject of solar, batteries, charging, and just everything that has to do with that subject. So go check him out. I'm going to put a link at the end of this video, and I'll also put a link in the description to his channel. Go check him out. Let him know that I sent you over. And with that, I want to thank you guys for checking out the new channel. If you think that the information I'm going to share on this channel is going to be useful to you, please do subscribe down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you have any comments or questions, please, again, leave those down below as well. And we'll catch you guys again outside.